Welcome to What Really Matters podcast, Everyday Spirituality with Karen Wyatt. For those of you who are new to this podcast or don't know me, I'm a retired hospice physician. I've written 5 books now. I'm also the host of End of Life University podcast, where I share interviews with people who work in all aspects of end of life care. And this podcast is typically a solo podcast where I talk about more spiritual issues and more personal issues in a way. And so that's the purpose of starting it, is so that I could share some of my spiritual insights here for people who are interested in that. And I separated it out from End of Life University just so that people who don't want to hear about this sort of thing don't have to listen. But today I'm going to do a little shorter episode and talk about my thoughts about the afterlife, because many people have asked me that, and I don't really talk about it on the End of Life University podcast. But this week on that podcast, my guest is Father Nathan Castle, who's a Dominican friar who for most of his adult life has been receiving after-death communications in his dreams from people who are kind of stuck in this in-between realm. And he uses prayer and connection with spiritual beings to help them move across to the other side. And so because he and I had this in-depth conversation, I realized it'll be obvious to people listening from the way I talk with him that I'm totally open-minded about an afterlife, but I've never really explained that to anyone. And so where my awareness of the afterlife came from, and I promised that I would do a little episode for What Really Matters podcast about that. So that's what I'm doing today, to just talk a little bit more about how I see things and what I've experienced. So for one thing, if you've listened to End of Life University podcast, you will find I'm very open-minded, and I love listening to guests who have had unique and unusual experiences. I like hearing their stories. I want to hear everything that they have to share. And but I don't always offer my own perspective while they're speaking. I want to give them the platform to share what they've experienced and what they understand. So once again, inspired by my conversation with Father Nathan Castle, I'll give you just a short little history of my own personal experience of the afterlife and where my way of thinking comes from. So I was raised by a Christian mother. She was Lutheran at the time when I was a child. She later went on to become an evangelical Christian, but when I was a child, she was attending the Lutheran church, and that's where I was raised, with some pretty traditional ideas about heaven and hell. But when I was around 5 years of age, I had what I believe was a near-death experience from the way it has been described to me. And what I mean by that is I nearly died. I was ill. My parents are not exactly sure what was wrong with me, but I was ill. They found me in bed, not breathing, and blue one afternoon. My father did artificial respirations. They called for an ambulance, and apparently the EMTs did CPR in the ambulance and got my heart restarted before we got to the hospital. But they told my mom later that they did not think they would be able to save me. And so they were really surprised when my heart started again and I started breathing on my own. And I have a recollection of waking up in the hospital. I do remember that when I was 5 years old. So that's a very clear memory for me, being in the hospital. And I remember from then on, over the course of several years, having EEGs done, and while doctors tried to figure out what was wrong with me. But this was in the 1950s, early 1960s. So we just didn't have the diagnostic studies available to really do a workup on that. But what occurred to me later is that something happened to me at the age of 5 that was an unusual experience, because all during my early childhood, something about me was a little different than the other kids I knew. I had this awareness, this knowing about me somehow, if I can describe it, that there was something bigger than me. I became fascinated by the stars and by looking up at the sky and contemplating it. I used to climb up in a tall tree in our backyard and sit in the branches of the tree and watch the sky and look at the clouds. I remember in school when I first learned the concept of infinity, I was elated because it felt like I finally had a name for something I already knew about, for something that I already perceived, that was already part of my awareness. And there was a name for it and there was a symbol for it. And I just remember how excited I felt. When I was around 7 years old, I had a conversation with my mom. She was talking to me about God, which she did a lot because she was a religious woman. And she was describing the God that she believed in, which was a God in the sky who was an old man with white hair and a white beard. She was describing this to me, and I listened to her a little bit puzzled, and she was telling me God made everything. God made everything on the earth. And I understood that, but I did not identify with the description that she presented to me of God, of who this God is that she believed in. And so I listened to her very carefully, and I remember asking her, okay, God made everything. And I said, but who made God? Who made your God that you believe in? And that was a sincere question for me, because at that age, I already saw there's something else that is so much bigger than this small God that she's describing to me. There's something else so much bigger than that, something else that is the creative force that made everything. That's so much bigger than the God that she's looking at and seeing. And she got upset with me for asking that question. She told me never to ask a question like that again. She said it was offensive to God that I would ever ask that, and I should never say that in front of another person. So I understood that somehow I was entering into territory that was taboo in a way. But I also knew what I knew. I knew that what I had perceived, what was in my head, what I understood, what I saw in the stars, in the infinity symbol, in contemplating the vastness of the universe, I knew that that was the truth. And yet I could not talk about it. I couldn't share it. And a few years after that, I don't know my exact age, but I was probably 9 or 10 years old. In the middle of the night, one night, I woke up to see hovering over my bed this transparent figure of a woman who was the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. I can still picture her face, and she was hovering over me, looking down at me, smiling at me with the most pure, intense love is the only name I have for it that I have ever experienced. And she was full of light, and she was shining the light on me, and I was experiencing this incredible love. And I was not afraid at all. I somehow knew, like, oh, yes, yes, yes. This is what I know. This is what I've known all along is there. This is what I've known is the truth. And I said to her, what's your name? What's your name? Who are you? And I actually got out of bed and I turned the light on thinking, I want to see you better. I want to see you. I want to connect with you. And the vision disappeared as soon as I turned the light on. But I went back to bed in this really elated state of joy and laid there for a long time. And it became very clear to me right away, I cannot tell anyone about this experience, particularly my mother, because I knew she would not accept this. It was somehow in that area that was taboo, that I was not supposed to discuss. It would somehow challenge her or threaten her, and I could not talk about it. So it became my own story that I kept secret and hidden for years and years. But what I understood as I contemplated the next day, like, what was that? Who was that? What happened? And what came through to me was that was my guardian angel. And I have an angel who is with me, who's looking over me, who's there for me. And I knew that to be true as well in that moment. I have a guardian angel. And I do remember a little later on when I was in a confirmation class around age 13, one of our confirmation teachers, a man, told us a story of himself having a vision and seeing a guardian angel. And I knew, like, it is a real thing. It does happen to people. That is what happened to me. It is my guardian angel that I saw and that I feel and that I'm aware of is present with me. So he validated what I had experienced. Again, I still didn't feel safe talking about my own experience, but it was very helpful to me to hear someone else, even someone within my mom's religion, talking about it, to help consolidate the ideas in my head that this is the truth. This is a real thing. As time went on, as I grew older and older, I had some other extraordinary experiences, but often in my dreams, various dreams that I had. And that continued to get more and more intense. In my 20s, one of my best friends died by suicide. And I later, it was a few years later, had dreams of her coming back to me and talking to me. Then if you've followed my story at all, you'll know my father died by suicide when I was in my early 30s. And I've had a number of dreams about my dad. His death propelled me into hospice work because I wanted to know more about death on the human plane, death and dying and grief. And hospice work was profound for me. There I saw lots of deathbed phenomena. I saw people having visions. I saw people having after death or prior to death communications. I witnessed that in my patients who were dying, and I began to have dreams of my hospice patients where I would see them as translucent light beings right before they died, sometimes up to 2 weeks before they died. And what I understood is I'm somehow seeing them as pure soul, pure spirit energy in that moment. And I knew then they're getting very close to dying, and that's why I'm seeing them in my dreams. So these were the experiences I've actually had in my own life over time. They continue to this day, and I've never wavered since being 5 years old in my knowledge and assurance that there is something greater than us. There is a spiritual realm all around us. I can't say that I know exactly what it's like or what it consists of or exactly what happens when we die or how it unfolds or where we go, is if there's a place. I can't say that I have answers to all those questions. I simply have a knowing that there is something there. So when I hear people describe near-death experiences, and when I hear Father Nathan talking about his experiences, when I speak with mediums who have connected with people after they have died, I have room for all of that. All of that can fit within what I have witnessed and experienced about the spiritual realm, about a realm that exists after this human life, beyond, around, transcends this human life, and even includes this human life. So I wanted to just explain that to you. People ask me, do you believe in an afterlife? It is not a belief for me, because I think a belief is when you accept something that you don't know. But for me, there is an internal knowing, an internal knowledge, an internal experience of this spiritual realm that tells me it exists and it is the truth. And so it isn't that I believe in something that someone else told me about. In fact, I do not believe in the heaven and hell that were taught to me when I was a child. Even then, I didn't really believe in them. I saw something beyond that. I do not believe in that version of what an afterlife is, but I accept and understand that some people do, and some people have witnessed it and believe with their heart and soul that that is the truth. And there's room for that. I accept that that is what they perhaps have come to know or to just believe because they were taught it by someone they trust. So, but for me, my experience of this spiritual realm goes beyond belief. It is a way of knowing. It is something that my higher self, my higher consciousness knows, is connected to, has experienced, has been part of, is still part of. And so that's where my ability to invite guests on who are mediums, who speak with animal spirits, who connect with people stuck in the in-between realm, all of it comes from that, from my awareness. There's definitely something more. I don't have all the answers about it. And I don't have a lot of criteria or limitations about it or rigid ideas about it. I simply know for sure energetically there is something more beyond this physical realm and this physical life. So that's what makes me open to it, but also what helps me not be afraid of death and dying, and what has helped me as well navigate grief and experience grief fully in my ego, body, mind, my very human part of me, but to find some solace in my higher consciousness and this expanded view of what life really is, and this spiritual realm and life that exists all around us, even while we're living out this physical life here on planet Earth. So there you have it. That's my explanation of how I see the afterlife and why I see it that way and what I have experienced. So judge what you will. If it doesn't resonate with you, that's fine. But maybe you've had some kind of similar experiences. At any rate, I hope it helps you understand a little bit better where I come from and some of the episodes in the future that you'll hear on this podcast. So thanks for joining me for this briefer episode today. And I'll be back soon. I'm going to be doing one on some practices for becoming an elder, and that's going to come out in just a few days. So thanks for being here and supporting me on this podcast and End of Life University. And remember that we're here for love. That is the thing that matters most. And because we experience love, we are also going to experience grief. Our work needs to be facing our fear, becoming ready for whatever life brings us next, and remembering to stay in the present moment and love each and every single moment that we get to be here on this planet Earth. So take care. Bye-bye.